In this section of M1.3.2, let us consider the ethical guidelines governing the wildlife research. Sound science requires animal subjects to be physically, physiologically, and behaviorally unharmed. Despite abundant focus on responsible care of laboratory animals that we just saw in the last section, inattention to the maltreatment of wildlife constitutes an ethical blind spot in the contemporary animal research. The welfare of vertebrates studied in the wild has received less consideration despite the fact that wildlife research primarily occurs outside the direct supervision of the research institutions. Moreover, it is important to note that whereas the laboratory animals belong to only a handful of taxa, wildlife research can span physiological and behavioral variation across more than 60,000 vertebrate species. Wild animals are used for research as well as management purposes throughout the world. Animals are often subjected to procedures and risks of compromised welfare from capture, anesthesia, handling, sampling, marking, and sometimes selective removal. Animal research is generally very well defined and is covered by the legislation, whereas wildlife management is not. The protection of wildlife animals differs depending on the procedure they are subjected to and how they are classified. It is often difficult to define the dividing line between these two categories. This gray area creates uncertainty and problems beyond animal welfare. There is a need for increased and improved official animal welfare control facilitated by compatible legislation and a similar ethical authorization process for all wild animal procedures. Legislation for protection of wildlife. Since the world's first animal protection legislation that was established in England in 1822, several countries have implemented protection of animals as a part of the national legal framework. These are regulations such as Wildlife Protection Acts, various regulatory bodies such as national biodiversity boards, etc., ensuring that the wildlife research does not cause harm to the biodiversity as well as the ecological interactions and harmony that exists in particular region due to related research activities. There are protocols and guidelines framed specific for the type of wildlife animals to be used for the research study. There are taxon-specific organizations that have created field-based animal care guidelines, for example, guidelines of the American Society of Mammalogists for the use of wild mammals in research. International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. Established in 1964, the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species has evolved to become the world's most comprehensive information source on the global extinction risk status of animal, fungus, and plant species. The IUCN Red List is used by government agencies, wildlife departments, conservation-related NGOs, natural resource planners, educational organizations, students, and the business community. Wildlife researchers can themselves follow the ethics by their own virtue of understanding the need for the protection of wildlife. Along with this, the awareness of the public in this regard can and has played a significant role in questioning the moral legitimacy of the research study that could cause intentional harm to such wild animals.